grandmother and great-grandmother, and passed it down to these girls today who take it and give it away like it's yes. Nothing, like it's something to win cultural points with, to give to somebody who thinks that they're the opposite sex and that they can go ahead and move into the women's spaces and win the women's races and tennis matches and soccer games and all of that, and like it's just something to be cast aside. And I find that really tragic. We need to protect women's sports. It's changed women's lives profoundly. And unfortunately, the ACLU is bound and determined to take that away by defining women as not by bodies, which are what play sports, but by gender ideology, which is basically thought in someone's head. It's a feeling. And people are granted the right to believe that, but they can't push it on us. We are women because we were born women. We have female bodies. We didn't wake up one day and go, am I a woman? Let me see, I'll consult my gender identity. No, we woke up and realized we were women because we are women, and we need to protect that. Recently, the ACLU was involved in a case where a man who identified as transgender befriended a lesbian couple, and for some reason he had a beef with them and eventually ended up stabbing one of the women to death over and over. It was, I've heard various reports, it was between 20 and 30 times, just a horrible scene. Stabbed the lesbian woman to death, then proceeded to stab her wife to death, and then shot and killed their son.
Okay, that must be the best.
Now, guess where the ACLU thinks this trans-identifying male, which prison they think he should go to? Well, that's right. It just came out in the news that he's off to the women's prison. And now, in what reality? Like, where are we? What kind of world is this where that makes any sense? I can't help but think that 10 years from now, we're going to look back at this time and go, can you believe that this happened? That they decided that people with a gender identity, a feeling, should be in women's sports because they feel like women, whatever that is. And people with this gender identity that says they're female should be in women's prisons, even though they just murdered or raped or performed other sexually violent acts, which about half of trans-identified males who are in women's prisons have on their records, and way above what the general prison population has as far as having sexual crimes. How does that make any sense? Well, somehow it makes sense to the ACLU because they're captured just like a lot of other people are captured. But fortunately, we've got a lot of women here who are just standing up and saying, that is crazy, that's ridiculous, we're not going to let that happen. And fortunately, we have a lot of friends across the world. I'm very friendly with a lot of people in the UK. My daughter actually lives in the UK, and I've met some TERFs there. Yay, TERF Island. Thank you. If you watch this, we love you guys. They are blazing a trail similar to ours. In the UK, you can actually be visited by police for saying something like, only women have cervixes. Right. And I want you to say this with me right now. Only women have cervixes. And I hope that you guys in the UK can hear that. We're on your side. We've been watching how you've been having these Let Women Speak rallies, and they're so inspiring. They get so many women, and we're going to get there too because we're all in this together. In Scotland, it's almost worse than here. They seem to have unleashed all the rapists in Scotland, putting them into women's prisons, and so we're we're feeling quite the sisterhood with our turf sisters on the other side of the ocean and on the other continents. And as a matter of fact, they, at one of their protests, or several of their protests, they started singing this song, and it's to the tune of Old Lang Syne. And I passed out, or Amy or Jennifer passed out the words, and it's to the tune of Old Lang Syne. And the chorus is for women's rights are human rights. We won't let you forget. For women's rights are human rights. This isn't over yet.
No, it's not.
And when we sing the chorus, and especially that last line, I really want to hear you say, this isn't over yet. We've just started, and we're not going to stop until it is over. So I'm not a great singer. I hope you guys will help me. It's the tune of Old Lang Syne. Forgive my cracked voice. Are you a good singer? Okay, here we go. We stand together side by side. We will defend our rights. We stand together side by side. We will give up this fight. For women's rights are human rights. We won't let you forget. For women's rights are human rights. This isn't over yet. The ACLU and their friends may think we can be calm. Our minds and bodies will defend. Our no will ring out loud. For women's rights are human rights. We won't let you forget. For women's rights are human rights. This isn't over yet. One more. So a hand in sisterhood, our sex won't be denied. For dignity, reality, we are standing side by side. For women's rights are human rights. We won't let you forget. For women's rights are human rights. This isn't over yet. I don't know how I'm going to follow that, but
You got this.
thanks, Christina. I'm Julia Hing. I'm a member and volunteer for Wolf, and I write a blog there about women in prison. And I'm also a New Yorker, and I've, like Brittany and a lot of other people here, I contributed to the ACLU for many, many years, but not anymore, because as we know, they show such little disregard for women. I was talking to Amy Ichikawa recently, the founder of Women to Women and the great prison advocate for incarcerated women, and she was telling me that Dana Rivers, the same man who Susan was just speaking of, who has been transferred to the women's prison there, he really settled in, and he's been terrorizing the female inmates, forced to share spaces and showers and use the toilet in front of him. So he's in his glory, And to reiterate, he shot 3 people and he stabbed one of them 47 times. So the judge in that case, when he was sentencing Dana Rivers, real name David Warfield, I believe, the judge said this was the worst, most depraved crime he had seen in 33 years of being on the bench. And this is the man that the ACLU believes should be spending his sentence with women. Now, most people here know, but maybe people that are watching don't know, something like maybe even over 86% of the women that are incarcerated have been victims, before being incarcerated, of domestic violence, almost always at the hands of men. They also are largely survivors of rape, molestation,
These women have been through the ringer before they even get into the prison, so they arrive traumatized, and they're terrified of men, which makes sense given what they've been through. They lived horrible lives. So now these same women are being locked into cells with men. There's one, I know there's, again, I got this from the great Amy Ichikawa, who is in touch with the women in that prison, so she knows exactly what's going on. She gets it right from their mouth. The women take turns staying awake because there are more than one bed in the cell, and you're in there with with a man. Yeah. A man. I have to point out too, because a lot of the public don't know, a trans woman is a man, and not just a man. 95% of them don't get rid of their penis. That's right. And they're straight. So these are just straight guys, sometimes with breasts, sometimes with not, always with paraphilias, always with perversions. So these women are terrified to go to sleep next to these men. In fact, there have been times in this prison where a woman has woken up to a man who is put there because he says he's a woman on top of the sleeping woman, attacking her. So this is what's going on. And when they complain, the women are actually punished by the guards. They're put in the hole, they're put into solitary, they lose their privileges. Because I guess guards don't care and the guards don't want the paperwork. So they're terrorized, and again, Dana Rivers is taking full advantage of this because he knows they can't do anything. And this is the type of man that the ACLU, who I'm ashamed to have supported most of my adult life, they are championing him, they're defending him, they are using their full might to defend a man who hated women so much that he got the all-woman Mitch Fest canceled, and he brutally murdered 2 lesbians and their son. So this is who the ACLU thinks women should have to bunk with. And, it's just so upsetting that, you lose your train of thought. So for decades, the ACLU fought for transparency in government. They wanted the public to be able to see what's going on, see what our government is doing. So they fought to make public records of cases, of judgments, of what's going on behind the scenes. So that was their thing. I mean, they were so dedicated to making sure the public was able to access public records. Now, in 2021, shockingly, they sued Washington State to prevent the public from knowing the amount of trans men, males with penises being put in women's prison. So they sued to block that information, and it's a Freedom of Information Act. They blocked that. They don't want us to know. And it's no coincidence that the ACLU, well, they're not getting my little $200 a year, or Brittany's, or even when I was skinned $25 a year, they're getting millions and millions of dollars from Arcus Foundation, who gave them $15 in, one time. They're getting money from George Soros. They're getting money from the Pritzker family. One of the Pritzkers is a man who thinks he's a woman, again, has his penis. So this is who they've chosen to defend, and you can't help but ask why. I mean, if women can afford all that money, if we could raise the millions of dollars, would they suddenly then defend us and not men who say they're us, who try to wear us as a costume? I don't know, but they've corrupted, and it's shocking as a lifelong liberal. It just hurts. It hurts to know how little they care about women, and I just want to read off a couple of other people that they defend at the expense and safety of actual women. There's Richard Masbrook. He's a man in prison, and he cut off his own penis by himself in his cell. Then he was housed, then he said he was a woman. Now that his penis is gone, he's suddenly a woman. He was transferred to women's prison. People figure, oh, he's safe, no penis. Anyway, he was a violent sex offender who then used foreign objects to rape the female inmates. So the idea that a violent man is no longer violent because he's on hormones or cuts his penis off is a load of bullshit. And the fact that we're being darvoed into believing that we have nothing to fear from this man, I mean, we see it over and over and over again. On the first day, a man was transferred into a prison in the Midwest. There was a whistleblower, a guard, whose identity is being protected. On the very first day, he raped a female inmate. But we don't hear about this in the press. No, we hear about these poor, oppressed, trans women, Karadansky's little thing, trans women that us mean women are putting in jeopardy. You know, I mean, recently I was reading something that it referred to people that Jennifer's last protest in New Jersey, in Trenton, at the prison there, they referred to us as goons. Now, I was one of the tallest ones there, and I'm 5'4". So I kind of think it's funny. I mean, I've never been called a goon in my life, but I'm a goon, and these poor men in the dresses and the wigs, and with their long history of sexual offenses, they're the victims. This is who the ACLU defends over me, over all these women, over our mothers and grandmothers, our sisters, our daughters. This is who they choose to defend. Violent, perverted, sick men who hate women so much that they think we're just a costume to wear. So I say the ACLU is gone, it's dead, whatever it stood for is gone. And I say shame on you, ACLU, shame. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech. Yes, I agree. We dismantle the ACLU. At this point, I don't think it can be saved. It's pretty far along. They know it's not just a little wrong. You know, what they're doing to women in prison is heinous. It's against the Geneva Convention. It's horrible to be alive and know that there is such a lack of respect for women and for what we do for society that this was even allowed to happen. There should never have been men put in women's prisons, and there shouldn't be men in our bathrooms or our locker rooms or our rape shelters, and there shouldn't be messing with our data, our free speech, our newspapers. If you see an article that says a woman child molester, age 45, 6'5", has been arrested on such and such street, blah, 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 suspected of pedophilia. And you go to the article and you search and search until you see a mugshot and you find out that it's a man. Well, that messes with our data collection, and that has repercussions. You know, women will be sentenced harsher. They'll be in prison longer. And they're in prison with men that will rape them. And there is no consent in prison. There is no way a woman can consent. First of all, the men they're putting in there, if Ted Bundy were alive today, he would be allowed to identify as a woman and transfer into a woman's prison. Dana Rivers, killed two women and their son. He's allowed in there. There's the men that they are putting in there are meant to rape the women and get them pregnant. There's no other explanation for this. Right? So, and it's not a tangible thing. You're like, why? Well, because they're evil. They don't have morality. They don't have respect for women, children, and men. They do not have respect for us. They want us to comply and shut up. And we're here today to get loud and resist. Matt's up next. Matt, thank you, Matt Osborne.
Can you hear me, ACLU? I have a question. In the name of the late, great Magdalene Burns, I ask you, did your mind get so far open that your brain fell out? The most un-American phrase of my lifetime is, this is not a debate. America is a debate. To say there is no debate is to say there is no America. The extraordinary effort to silence objections and squelch debate in the name of gender identity is un-American. I am an American and I object. My name is Matt Osborne. I am the editor-in-chief of the DistanceMag.com. It is a publication of LGB United. I'm a lifelong Democrat. I got a little bit famous a couple of years ago for my role in electing a Democrat, Doug Jones, to the United States Senate right here. Go ahead and call me right-wing. Find out what happens. Find out. Call me names and see how I vote. Keep it up. You're doing great. I used to be a card-carrying member of the ACLU. Now I find them utterly repulsive. They claim to be a nonprofit civil rights organization, but they represent a very narrow view belonging to a shrinking minority of Americans. Beliefs are ideas, luxury beliefs are ideas and opinions that confer status on the upper class while inflicting costs on everyone else. Gender identity is a luxury belief. Only a minority of Americans shares this belief. The rest of us find it increasingly objectionable. No majority of Americans will tolerate being forced to perform and share a belief they find objectionable, nor should they. We are Americans! Today's American Civil Liberties Union is neither American nor civil. They want to disunite us. They advance the privileges and entitlements of a special group of men by abolishing the rights of women to fair sports, single sex, prisons, restrooms, locker room spaces, free speech, sports, all under the rubric of gender identity. This totalitarian program is justified by supposed threats of magical harm to supposedly vulnerable people if we do not obey. As seen in the example of author J.K. Rowling, this is the modern ideological witch hunt. It does not matter how fair and considerate our words are. Everything we say in defense of our freedoms is recast as hate because they hate it. It is reframed as sorcery because they think magically. We are guilty of black magic. We're harming the poor little dears with our bad thought vibrations. 1693 in Salem, that's what it is. It is religious thinking. We're Americans. We have a civic religion already. We object to the new gender religion being imposed upon us. We reject a dogma that requires we confess to believe in transubstantiation of the flesh through the utterance of pronoun prayer. Yesterday's ACLU fought to give Americans access to the courts. Today's ACLU works to limit the time that children and families have for filing malpractice claims against so-called gender medicine. The ACLU does this even though every young patient of the gender cult becomes a lifetime medical dependent. The full health impacts of sex change on a child can take years to become apparent. Jazz Jennings needed 5 seasons for the harms to become obvious. Across the Western world, systematic medical reviews of the literature justifying these so-called treatments have all found the evidence base to be, quote, low or no quality. Finland, France, Norway, Sweden, and the United Kingdom's Tavistock Clinic, they have all turned away from this affirmation approach. but the ACLU is still pouring considerable resources into overturning state laws and regulations that are in line with this emerging consensus that normal human puberty is the healthiest kind. Oh, who could have thought it? The ACLU are practicing medicine without a license. It is too much to say that they are running a medical experiment on our children. Experimental scientists keep data. In American pediatric gender medicine, there are no standards to speak of. It is a wild west. The old ACLU worked to inform Americans that they had rights. Today's ACLU publishes false legal advice for school districts. Their pamphlet, Schools in Transition, a guide for supporting transgender students in K-12 schools, frames uncooperative parents as the enemy. It makes no mention of Supreme Court precedents establishing parental rights. It does contain misinformation about the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA. And it encourages school officials to take sides in family disputes. Have you ever heard of a movement telling teachers and principals that they should show up for a divorce trial to pick a side? Have you ever heard of such a thing? That's the ACLU! They do not care how many families go through the hell of their making. Every day, as part of my work, I read through crushing accounts from parents with children that are caught up in this cult of Moloch. I'm exhausted from listening to detransitioners who've been harmed by this gender woo cult. The ACLU insists that they will commit suicide without the care of this medicalized cult. This is false, and it is criminal extortion. No parent can consent to suicide blackmail. No child can consent to puberty blockade. This is all a nonsense, but it is a profitable nonsense. After all, there are so many wealthy, elite men living their best lives these days and getting celebrated as women. Celebrated and endorsed and approved on magazine covers, and even appointed to oversee federal departments. Yeah, the dirty secret of today's ACLU is the extreme wealth that the organization enjoys, thanks to generous funding from civil society organizations, as they call themselves, which have promoted trans as a new civil rights movement for the 21st century. It is a rebranding exercise for wealthy white perverts. And the focus on trans kids has always been about what those men want for themselves. Not what children or worried parents want, what those men want. The ACLU is not a civil rights organization. Not now. It is the legal arm of the new gender identity industry. This place behind me, this is where the ACLU does its most important legislative lobbying. We speak for a growing supermajority of Americans who reject gender ideology and its totalitarian demands on the non-believer. We are Americans. We have rights. We object to this blinkered campaign to ignore or tremble the rights of many to please a few at the top. The ACLU does not represent us. It does not represent America or civil rights. The ACLU promotes disunion in families across the nation. There will be hell to pay for this illiberal turn, and the ACLU will be held accountable. Now look at me close. You're looking at a Democrat. You're looking at a lifelong liberal. Someone who sat on the porch in 1985 to form the first membership chapter of the ACLU in the state of Alabama. I did that because I truly believed in that agenda of the Bill of Rights and American freedom. But this is not that ACLU. This is a whole new organization. I don't recognize it. I abhor it. I reject it. And I want to make sure that the Democrats in that building behind me hear me when I say, I represent about half the party rank and file voters. Growing numbers. The numbers are growing. 2 years ago, somebody did a survey and they found that 62% of Americans opposed letting men cheat at sports in the name of gender identity. The most recent survey, post Leah Thomas, 69%. It went up 7 points. You lose just by fighting. When you push this agenda, you lose by fighting. And that's my message to the ACLU and to everyone who holds out thinking that this is some sort of right-wing conspiracy. I'm here to tell you, to announce to you, and you need to hear it, you're wrong. This is what democracy looks like. We're not going away. Our numbers are growing, and we will be back. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt Osborne. A little bit of that masculine energy, because the men are with us. And they try to separate families and men and women, but men love women. And thank you, Matt, for that lovely speech. And women love men. They are not going to divide us because, you know, we're powerful when we're together. Joy, you're up next. Here you go.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. Thank you to everyone who's speaking, everyone who's listening, including my loved ones at home. My name is Joy Gray, and I hope you bear with me. I'm going to talk for a little bit of time, but I hope I don't bore any of you, and I'll try not to ramble, and I'm sorry I'm nervous. People tell me I'm really good at public speaking, and every time it doesn't get through. I get up here, I black out, and then I come to, and it's over. So bear with me. Again, my name is Joy Gray. I'm a victim advocate that lives here in Maryland, and I'm here as a walking contradiction. Here as the unforgivable conservative in the adult human female shirt, and the horrible feminist with the abortion rights hanger pin on my lapel. Women are politically homeless. At this point, they're forcing us back against the walls together. It's only a matter of time before women form the political party that we need to start organizing and representing our needs. I mean, you could call it Women Against Predators and you would cover just about all of our bases, I think. Again, I'm here because I believe in the free speech of women, and I'm here to talk about my lived experience as a woman. My mother died in 2015 from uterine cancer. She went misdiagnosed for a year of intermittent bleeding that was written off on 3 separate occasions, some of those that I was there for, as absolutely not cancer. It absolutely was cancer. The day before surgery that could have killed her, a D&E that was said to fix all of her problems, a coworker of hers, she was a Johns Hopkins University nurse for 30 years. A coworker said, have you ever gotten a second opinion? Because my mother had uterine fibroids that turned out to be cancer. And my mother said, I've been going to the same gynecologist for 30 years. No, I never got a second opinion. She went for a second opinion. That doctor took one look at her and said, I'm sorry, this is absolutely cancer. It was 9 months from diagnosis to death. This is just one example of the horrendous medical neglect that women experience all the time in America. After her death, I dropped out of school. I spent a lot of time working and trying to build my life back together, keeping my family together. When I finally did go back to school, it was after I had already discovered radical feminism, which it's hard for me because I think it's an analysis. You don't have to be required to believe anything to be a radical feminist. Do you understand the analysis? Okay, then you understand the analysis of male privilege, male violence, and what that does for women and girls in real terms, in practical terms. So I went back to school in 2019. And in the time in between that, I was working, I was experiencing sexual harassment, sexual assault. I was raped while I was on a date at a man's house. We had had consensual intercourse, and then on the way out, my hand was on the doorknob, and he grabbed the back of my pants and he put me on the floor. I remember thinking I was gonna go. My hand was on the door. That's all. It was like a broken record. My hand was on the door. My hand was on the doorknob, and he raped me. And I drove from there to an urgent care. This is in 2019, I believe 2018. Trauma kind of messes with your dates, but I have a record of this medical visit of this urgent care where I talked to a doctor there. I would not tell any of the staff why I was there. I said, just get me in front of a doctor. I won't tell you why I'm here. And I finally got they put me in front of a doctor, and I told him what happened. I said I was just on a date, and I got raped, and I don't know what to do. What do I do? And he looked at me, and he said, I know it sounds horrible, but I'm going to level with you. It was only you and him at his house where there were no witnesses, where you just admitted to me that you had consensual sex beforehand, which means that anyone investigating this would only care about he said, she said. Let's take a break to examine that phrase, he said, she said. When it's about what women say happened to us, but it's about what men say we say, because they determine the narrative. This man, this doctor, in 2017 or 2018, in recent years, told me not to report. Quote, I cannot honestly tell you it would be worth your trouble. And while that man was completely right, he had no idea why he was right. A week later, 1 week later, oh, I'm sorry, let me go back. Right before I left the office, he said, if you end up wanting to go do a rape kit and pursue charges, he told me the closest hospital to me where they had a rape crisis unit. He said it might be hard to get in, but they're the only one that services this city and the surrounding county. One rape crisis unit. A week later, a friend of mine called me from another state and said, I was just raped at a Halloween party. She was raped by her cousin's husband, a military service member. Maybe 2 weeks before that, I wouldn't have known what to do. But I wasn't going to accept the mistreatment and neglect that I allowed that doctor to convince me was all I was worth. I wasn't going to have that same standard for someone I cared about. So I told her, get over here. Anyway, what can I do? Can I pick you up? Do you need to drive home? What do I need to do to come with you and take you to the people who can help us? She came back. We went to the rape crisis unit. She did everything she was supposed to do. She got the rape kit done. She got the re-traumatizing bullying from the police officer, where the victim advocate from the hospital and myself both had to step in on separate occasions to say, stop bullying her about reporting. She's telling you over and over she's not ready to report. She can barely think straight. She's not going to give you a statement that can be used against her in a court of law right now. Stop pushing her. And he was rude to both of us. I filed a formal complaint against that officer. This is not how women are helped after they are assaulted. Following that, we followed up with the military. What do we do here? Because when we tried to file with the local police department where it happened, they told us that's a military member. You have to take it up with the military. We didn't hear anything in response. When we finally did, it was 3 years later. And in that 3 years, we were very busy. We learned about victim advocacy, and we went to state-sponsored, government-sponsored trainings. Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault, different rape crisis units where we went to get trained by their centers. And the things we learned absolutely horrified us. For example, there are many states in America where there are rape loopholes, legal rape loopholes. I need you to understand what that means in plain layman's terms. It means that there are conditions under which a man can rape a woman and it is not a crime. There would be no legal grounds to charge him with a crime because there's a loophole in the law that enables it to happen. I want to talk about a specific instance in which I learned about this, which was during one of these trainings. One of the speakers at the trainings was a Maryland American district attorney, a prosecuting attorney who was telling us about these loopholes, talking about the struggle that they had in closing these loopholes, not just in Maryland, but states across the country. Struggle? A struggle to close rape loopholes? What are you talking about? The two rape loopholes that are most persistent in remaining open are the police rape loophole, the law enforcement rape loophole that allows police officers to sanction sexual favors and the like from people, mostly women, who they arrest in exchange for letting them go. Give me a blowjob and I'll let you out of my car and won't charge you with a crime is not a consensual situation. It is the definition of an abuse of power. You know what they said when that was taken to the legislature and argued? When it was argued, we need to close this loophole and not allow police officers to solicit sexual favors in exchange for being let off of criminal charges or being arrested. It was said, what about men who are investigating and arresting their own wives? Are you saying that a police officer can't have sex with his wife if he's investigating her and arresting her? That flimsy logic, which defies all reality. A police officer would never be allowed to investigate his own wife. That's the definition of a conflict of interest. But it didn't matter how ridiculous that hypothetical was. That was all that it took to keep the loophole open. The other loophole that is very common across the country is a marital rape loophole. I was told that the year I was born, 1993, marital rape loopholes were closed in this country. For a long time, that comforted me. I found it kind of quirky and unique. Like, I can associate my year of birth with the year that America decided women matter. That women weren't just men's property to rape and abuse at their free will, whenever they wanted, and never be able to say no or seek any recourse against it, any protection against it. But then I found out about the marital rape loophole, which says, in many states, including Maryland, that a man is legally allowed to rape his wife. This is not the exact wording of the law, but in effect, this is what it means, confirmed by the prosecutor, the district attorney, prosecuting attorney, that if a man rapes his wife and she is unconscious for any reason, they frame it as unable to provide proof of non-consent. The idea that unless you can prove that a woman has not consented, she is consenting by default, which is just an extension of the marital rape loophole that husbands have a right to rape their wives. The same logic, keeping that loophole open past 2020. 2020. And this prosecuting attorney went on to talk about her lived experience as a prosecuting attorney. The court case that she was currently just finished, where they were trying to charge a man with raping his wife after they were discovered and put into evidence dozens of videos of him raping her unconscious body while she was unconscious on cancer medication. The law doesn't care whether it's alcohol, cancer medication, not that there's ever an acceptable reason. But this woman was on cancer medication. They had dozens of videos, and because in 3 of those videos, her body moved in involuntary ways, an arm pushed back, her leg twitched to try to close her legs from him violating her. 3 instances caught on film of the dozens he filmed and posted. Because of those 3, they were able to charge him on 3 counts. She's telling us this group of maybe like 20, 30 people that are there for a training. And these 2 in full uniform police officers from that county stood up and said, well, one said, I would like to speak. They're both sitting together. She said, sure. He stands up and he turns around, turns his back on the woman who's teaching us, who's telling us about what this lived experience is, her professional experience is, turns his back on her, and he says, I know this sounds horrible. I know it sounds bad, but this is such a small minority of cases where this basically is just a faux pas. Like, it's an accident that this is allowed to happen. Like, it doesn't really happen though. Like, as you can see, like, it's just this bad hypothetical. He had not even been listening to the instructor as she told this very real dystopian story of not being able to charge this man with dozens of counts of rape. And I raised my hand and asked the woman in charge, the woman leading this discussion, the district prosecuting attorney, and I said, I'm sorry, I really need you to clarify for me. Are you saying that if you were not able to recover those videos from his phone, out of the dozens that he took, if you were not able to find those 3 videos, then you would not have been able to charge him with anything because there would have been no evidence of a crime that had taken place? And she said, yes, that is absolutely the case. And I know it's horrible, but that's the truth. That's unacceptable. That is one nightmarish case in one county, in one state. And it's a level of horror that I cannot sit by and accept. And again, we wanted more information. We went to more trainings. We got educated as much as we could through people that were professionals, that knew what they were talking about. And then I went back to school, and it was unbelievable, the ideological capture that had taken place over the course of a few years. The Women's Center was no longer just for women. In fact, every banner on the Women's Center website at my university says, the Women's Center is open to all women who respect all women and their experiences. It is so gender ideologically heavy, it is very clear that unless you believe what gender ideology believes, what they claim to believe in transubstantiation, in this unbelievable and absolutely objectively untrue claim that men can be women and vice versa, that unless you believe that, you're not welcome at the Women's Center. That was creepy enough. Then I was getting tutoring. My math tutor was a Muslim woman who we actually connected very well, and we got close to each other over the semester. And we started talking about some of these issues that I had found on Pinterest of all places, the first place I'd ever stumbled across this discussion. And at the time, I identified as a libertarian, and I thought, who cares? Like, I don't believe in any religion. I don't ascribe to any particular belief set at all, except that you should be treat everyone with respect and be treated like a human being. So I thought I was a libertarian until a woman who knew what she was talking about corrected me and asked, what about women's prisons? What about fetishists? What about rapists? What about women's self-respect? What about our right to say, you don't get to tell me what I am. You don't get to claim to be me and then tell me to shut up about it. She made me see how wrong and ignorant I was in clinging to this notion of no harm. There was so much harm being done. And in talking to this Muslim math tutor, she told me she no longer had access to the women's bathrooms on campus. I said, what do you mean? They just built this big new building where they had these fancy and well covered in the school's media, all gender restrooms where any person of any gender could go use. So what do you mean? You have women's rooms? No. Out of the other side of their mouth, my university very quietly adopted self-ID policies for all existing restrooms. Meaning that all restrooms were mixed sex now. And she, a Muslim woman, could no longer use women's rooms. She was relegated to individual bathrooms in order to feel that she was being faithful to her religious belief. This is a violation of her religious freedoms. Again, where is the ACLU? How many other women are being affected by this ideology? That same campus, I've used multi-gender restrooms because I have to run into the bathroom sometimes. I try to take a friend if I can, and mysteriously, they are always empty. Always. But now, 4 times in one semester, I've run into trans-identified men. They're just men. They're trans-identified women. They call themselves trans-identified women. They're men. I've run into men in the women's rooms, and you know what I do? I turn right back around and stand outside. Because they can force us to allow them open. The school has allowed them access to the restroom, but they can't make us use it with them. I stand outside, and one time a woman came up, she saw me standing there, and I just said, I'm just waiting. And she assumed it was full, so she stood with me. And then he comes out, and she looks at him, and she looks at me, and I'm walking in after he leaves holding the door open. She goes, thank you. Thank you. No problem. The third time was a father standing outside a women's room that I was about to go into, and his daughter, this tall, comes walking out alone from a women's room. Daddy outside. And I chased him down. I said, sir, do you know that men are allowed in that women's room? That many porn-sick college men, any porn-sick college man that wants to use that women's room, wants to be in there with your daughter, is absolutely allowed to. Do you know that men can use the women's room? And his response was, what do you mean men can use the women's room? He had no idea the risk that he was putting his daughter in because the school didn't publicize the truth. This is all about obfuscating the truth. And I'm here with a little bit more of my lived experience. I'm going to go back to my friend, the one who was raped by a military member. after our lived experience, we're learning all this as victim advocates. We're learning how to speak the language, how to talk to people, connect with people on the streets, and speak up about the injustices that women suffer. Finally, she was contacted by a member of the military, a victim advocate who said they couldn't believe how long it took her case to get across their desk for them to deal with the rapist that was in their ranks. We had many meetings with this pair, well, the whole team, the legal team, in trying to pursue charges against this man, which we did. In the first meeting, we find out that the civilian police that had previously told her that her rape kit came back inconclusive, yes, they called her. I was with her. She put it on speakerphone. We thought we were going to celebrate. They said, we didn't know we were going to celebrate. We were hopeful we were going to celebrate. They said the results of the rape kit came back inconclusive. That was a lie. It was never sent for testing. They were allowed to lie to her to get her off their backs. This is the civil liberties violations that the ACLU should be paying attention to. Instead, they're enabling them to continue during that first meeting where we were discussing the results of the rape kit, which were not inconclusive. They kept focusing on DNA, 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 DNA. And I said, I'm sorry, I just have to ask, what if there was no DNA? Because I went with her to that rape kit, when she got that rape kit done. I know that there was evidence of vaginal and anal trauma. I know there was physical proof that she'd been assaulted, the same way if someone had punched you in the face and left a black eye or tore your cheek open. I said, what about the physical evidence that she was assaulted? Doesn't that matter even if there was no DNA? And the whole team looked at the table and said, well, he said, I can't say his name, I don't think, but the major said, I know this is horrible, but we no longer even attempt to submit that evidence in court-martials because it is allowed to be excused as an improperly inserted tampon. She was not allowed to submit proof of her physical assault, tearing, bleeding, bruising, because the defense could claim we're just stupid women who don't know how to use a tampon. How many women have ever been torn open, bloody, left bruised with tampons? Never. It's absolutely illogical. It is as ridiculous as asserting that a police officer would be allowed to investigate his own wife. That's unacceptable. I said, are you kidding me? So we're not even going to present that in the court? He said, no, we're not. We're going to hope for DNA. Well, thank goodness they did find that DNA. And the only reason we could get the rape kit submitted was because we spent 6 hours between 2 emergency rooms trying to get the rape kit released. They didn't know how. You have the only rape kit crisis unit, the rape crisis unit, that serves the entire city and the county. And they did not know how to release the rape kit because the assault had happened in another state and not her home state. They said all of our rape kit release forms are for Maryland-specific hospitals. It says Maryland right on the form. We cannot cross it out and write in the other state. So you have to go to them for their rape kit release forms. Fair enough. We called down the civilian police department that was in charge of the case. They referred us over. They talked to someone from the hospital down there and said, well, all of their rape kit release forms have that state's specific cities listed in the form. You can't just cross out a city and put in a city that's not even in this state. They had no idea how to even release the rape kit to be tested when they had told her that it had come back inconclusive. And now we're here 3 years later, this was a couple years ago, taking it to be prosecuted in a military court-martial, which many people know but many don't, is different than a court of law. It's a separate entity that has their own trial, their own processes, their own standards. So we went through the whole trial. It was awful. The re-traumatization really woke me up to my purpose in life, which is victim advocacy. Before, I thought, I'm doing this because it just feels right. Like, if no one else is going to do it, we got to do it. And now I knew that it lit a fire in me that never stopped burning. because of what I experienced helping someone I actually loved and cared about more than myself. During the closing arguments of that rapist defense attorney, her closing arguments, the it was a military woman that was serving during the military court-martial as his defense attorney. In her closing arguments, things that are burned into my memory forever, she said to the judge, she said, "Your Honor, if the alleged victim who woke up during the time of the first alleged assault, she woke up to it happening. This woman said, if the alleged victim woke up to the assault and could not tell the difference between whether it was a finger or a penis violating her anus, if she couldn't tell the difference, if she wasn't sure upon waking up whether it was a finger or a penis, well, her dachshund was in the room that night. Who's to say she can tell the difference between a finger and a dog paw?" The people, even the seasoned victim advocate next to me went, "Oh, that's so offensive." It was unbelievable. This is what's allowed. They were so unprepared to convict that man, even with DNA evidence, even with her doing everything right, that she had 20 minutes to write her victim impact statement. Something that some victims, some survivors get months to write, months to prepare for what they feel like they need to say in a court of law. She was given 20 minutes because they told us they didn't expect to win. They got him on 2 of 3 times or more that he raped her that night, in one night. He served 1.5 years of a very short prison sentence at a military prison until something happened that I didn't know. All military convicted rapists get automatic appeals. All military convicted criminals are given automatic appeals no matter what. No matter how strong the evidence is against them, they are given automatic appeals, a second chance, as if it wasn't hard enough to convict that rapist the first time. This is what rape survivors have offered to them as support, as justice. After that, I stopped being able to call it the justice system. I now call it the legal system because it's just more appropriate. Knowing all this, I went back to school and I'm learning about women losing their rights. One of my professors who ended up being my mentor talked to me about his struggles with Title IX. If you've tuned me out to this point, please tune back in about Title IX. This is back in 2019, still holds true. Policy has not changed at my university in 2023. He told me that he felt conflicted about the mandatory reporting policy by my school. It was mandated that any employee of the university, any employee, a janitor that is cleaning the hallways, a food person that's serving food in the cafeteria, your professor, your RA, absolutely anyone who is on campus and employed by the university, even if they're not on campus, that's employed and signs this contract, is obligated to report instances of sexual violence that happen on campus, whether or not the victim wants it reported. On one hand, you want to believe, all right, with the right amount of mediation, I suppose that could make sense. You want to protect vulnerable people. You want to kick rapists off campus, right? That's not what they care about. They care about protecting themselves and protecting their reputation. I asked him, this professor that told me this, that he's on mandatory reporter. I said, so if someone just overhears, if I'm like in the cafeteria and someone overhears me talking about getting raped at a party, like a professor, assistant professor, whoever, they have a mandated obligation by the school, a legal obligation to report what I said, who it was, everything they know about me to someone from the school. And he said, yes. I think so, is what he said. And I said, how do we find out? I need to know whether this is real or not. I need to know whether this is just a poorly written policy. I want to know why it didn't make sense. He said, let me see if anyone's at the ACLU office. I'm sorry, the Title IX office. So he calls over, and there's 2 representatives at the Title IX office, and one of them was there. So we walked over together, me and my mentor, my professor. He walked me over, and we sat down with this woman, and I asked her a lot of questions about the process, about women's rights, about survivor rights. What do you mean someone can report my rape without my consent? And what happens after that? She explained that it's important in terms of legal responsibility, liability, for it to be reported. And I said, are you telling me that the school is allowed to pursue charges even if it's against a potential rape survivor's wishes? Are you telling me that if the school finds out about a rape and they are allowed to approach the survivor without her ever having disclosed or known she disclosed to anyone else, that legally they're allowed to approach her and hold her accountable and say, we know about this and we're investigating? And she said yes. I know it sounds horrible, but yes, I keep hearing that phrase or some variation. I know it sounds bad, but it's true. I said, okay, last question. If that rape survivor said, I do not want to pursue charges, that was the worst night of my life, I've been raped before, no one ever protected me, I know the legal system, I know how corrupt it is, I know the gaping holes waiting for women who are trying to get justice for their assaults. What if they say, no, I'm not putting myself through that trauma, I'm barely hanging on now. I don't want to do it, I won't do it, I want you out, I want this done. Are you telling me that the school would be legally allowed to pursue charges in the investigation against her wishes? And that means being able to indict her, to make her come into the court of law, to hold her legally responsible into coming in and saying, we are subpoenaing you in this investigation for what happened. And she said, yes. This is not about women or protecting women and girls, women's rights, stopping rapists. This is about protecting the school. There are so many more instances just like this. These are the human rights violations that the ACLU should care about, that people should be protesting in the streets over. How much does this happen? How many times? They accuse us of being single-issue voters. I just spent a month protesting outside Johns Hopkins University because they employ a pedophile activist in their Moore Center for the Prevention of Child Sexual Abuse. Dr. Alan Walker, an open pedophile advocate. They hired to stop pedophiles under the guise of MAP advocacy, minor attracted people. It's a misnomer for pedophiles. Dr. Walker's book is titled A Long Dark Shadow, Minor Attracted People in Their Pursuit of Dignity. Walker is talking about pedophiles in their pursuit of dignity. Walker claims to have interviewed 24, quote, non-offending pedophiles in order to write this book that she dedicated, quote, to those who accept themselves, those who are working on it, and those who accept others even when it's hard. She's talking about pedophiles. She claims to have interviewed 42 non-offending pedophiles to write this book. In the book, she talks about how some of them detail to her their use of child sexual abuse material, what other people know as commonly child pornography. Even the people argue that child pornography isn't a fair term. I agree, because it's nothing but sexual exploitation and abuse. That's true for a lot of pornography. But especially child sexual abuse pornography, child sexual abuse material. So you're writing a book about men that you claim are non-offenders who are openly telling you that they are offending by using this material. The book is full of very similar logical and moral contradictions. I spent a month protesting because this person believes that pedophilia should be included under the Pride umbrella. I'm sorry. She calls them MAPs. Again, normalizing and dignifying pedophilia. The walls are closing in for women and girls. I just turned 30. If I was going to stand here and tell you all about my lived experiences and the many, many things that have led to me being here today, we'd be here until after dark, long after dark. I'm nobody. I'm just a woman who cares, who sees these horrors, and wants to share my real lived experience to warn other women this is really happening. This is not about making crazy claims or shock and awe value. The horror is just there in itself because it's dystopian. This is dystopian levels of misogyny that have been allowed to run rampant and unchecked in our government and in our society. So I'm out here, again, I'm thanking all the women who came out. Thank you for listening to everything I had to say, and thank you for everyone who's being brave enough to speak. All we can do is keep talking. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joy. We're going to have a few more speakers. Come on up, come on up.
Hi, I've been to some pro-reality events over time. I've always been terrified of speaking, but here I am fumbling on my phone. I was like, here's something I wrote, and I'm reading off something with really tiny font. But you know, all the pro-reality events I went to, I was too afraid to speak, but I'm going to try to today. So here is an old essay I pulled up just today where I was like, yeah, I'll just do it. I'm just going to go out and do it. This is something I wrote back in early 2022, and so here it goes. So my empathy is with the women and girls who have been locked up with the male murderers and rapists who demand to be called women. So politically incorrect of me. My empathy is with the women who have been assaulted, harassed, raped and impregnated by this sacred group of men who are seen as so incredibly holy that they supposedly can transcend out of biological reality. This is an extremely supernatural belief that shouldn't be forced into policy and legislation. Apparently, the, quote, compassionate, politically correct liberal leftist thing for me to do is to pamper these incredibly abusive men who are apparently not men because they say so. The moment any man forces his penis inside of private female spaces and the female category itself, he is violating boundaries. I'm not okay with women forcing their vulvas into the category men, male, in the private male spaces either, but that's a separate combo, and women in men's prisons and sports and other spaces are less of a threat. This is the rape culture that liberals, leftists ignore, apologize for, and cheer on. Regarding the note about impregnated women in mixed-sex prisons, did social justice warrior liberals and leftists forget how babies are made? Is it because they got lost? Is it because they got lost in the fog of their nonsensical, reality-denying, elitist academic theories like queer theory? These harmful policies are based on nonsense. Are pushed by the pro-science people. Oh, let's give people birth control and it's all okay now. Queer theory and similar theories couldn't stay within the bounds of their own silos within academia. They had to penetrate and colonize themselves into our understanding of biology and language, as well as companies, laws, etc., in a dictatorial way. Isn't it ironic how this dictatorial stuff is promoted by anti-hierarchy and anti-fascist anarchists? What do words mean? Whenever this sacred group of men does anything wrong, social justice warriors will resort to logical fallacies and say, but they're not real trans, whenever it's convenient. Can any person coherently explain what female gender identity means without being circular or talking about sexist stereotypes? How is any adult human male not a man? How does any human/mammal transcend out of biological reality? What words can we have for reality? Why should we have policies based on words without coherent meanings to override reality-based policies? To make matters worse, some blue states have been proposing bills like HB 1956 in Washington. This essay a while ago, to hide and distort the statistics of male violence even further and hide evidence to the public about the horror of what's going on in women's prisons for, quote, privacy for these men. And yet the women caged with these psychopathic, violent men are not allowed to have basic privacy and space away from these abusive men who claim special identities. These men are so incredibly narcissistic and fragile, they can't handle the naming of reality that they are men. LOL, yes. Not all men are this fragile. Some men at least have the basic strength to acknowledge and tolerate the acknowledgement of biological reality, even from women. It's so exhausting to constantly clarify that even though male violence is a huge issue, and I support single-sex spaces in certain instances, men can also be honest, good people, and there's nothing inherently wrong with being male men. I still have faith in them, and I'm 100% supportive of men to be gay or bisexual and not compare to sexist stereotype. That they're still men, and that's factual and not insulting. Sometimes men are violent towards other males, especially gay and feminine men, whether those men claim special identities or not. Instead of confronting the issue of male violence to protect vulnerable boys and men, they simply dump the issue onto marginalized women and girls. Why am I not surprised? Do men have the right to use us as shields for male violence? Are women human beings or things for men to use? Men can work to protect other males by confronting male violence, but in the meantime, maybe vulnerable men and boys can advocate for vulnerable male spaces for themselves and separate from other males. For example, have a segregated wing for vulnerable males in male prisons. Sometimes I agree with conservatives on issues, even if I disagree with them on other issues. Conservatives, liberals, atheists, and religious people alike sometimes turn their nose up and refuse to work with people who think differently from them, even for an important cause. Sometimes you have to put differences aside to work for an important cause, whenever the other side is willing. I have volunteered and done work with Republicans, and we can still find common ground and work together despite our disagreements on other issues. It's possible. I'm not a Democrat either, but on economic issues, I'm more similar to Democrats than Republicans. Republicans, right-wing types, uphold abuse apologetics as well. Capitalism itself is abusive. There's tons of abuse apologetics and rape culture going on in the political left too. This is just one of the multiple issues that the left takes an anti-woman stance on. I'm just scratching the surface. So little to no accountability. Progressive types have contempt for everyday people, especially everyday women too. They are more compassionate until anyone disagrees with them, even if that means people, especially women, simply voicing their lack of faith in their corporate-driven, harmful, tyrannical, homophobic denial of same-sex attraction, religion of gender identity pushed by billionaires. Then these lefties are all for forcing people into destitution. When I dare to ask if anyone cares about oppressed people anymore based on these observations, liberal types will ignore my points that led up to that question and shut down the discussion via making accusations about my life when they maybe met me once or twice or never and don't know anything about me. Through my volunteer service and activist experience, the ironic lesson I learned that charity is often incredibly condescending, although better than nothing, I guess. Through these experiences, I've seen how even the types who get solidarity and justice over charity, at least superficially, will turn around and tear down impoverished and working class people once they disagree on something. I must note that it is a privilege for people to engage in charity, volunteering, and activism. The more I and other people are busily scrambling for ways to make money for basic necessities for survival under capitalism, the less time we have for unpaid, meaningful volunteer work. Many of these women have already been traumatized by extreme male violence. Many of these women have been impoverished. It's not like all of these women suffering male abuse in prison are all white either. There are also Indigenous and Black women who are being ignored as well, which is interesting because liberal leftists love to talk about how much they care about BIPOCs. The claim of fearing violent men in men's bathrooms from men who demand to be called women is taken extremely seriously. But females getting raped by males in women's prisons and other private spaces for girls, believe me, I really wanted to think the left was on the side of women, or at least the lesser of two evils regarding women's rights. Liberals and leftists prioritize threatening people into participating in a man's sexual fetish and or supernatural beliefs that he is a woman over safeguarding measures for women and children. They'll vilify women and children for not being kind or obedient enough to let men violate their boundaries and gaslight them. And don't forget, to use sex incorrect pronouns, or they demand, or else more emotional blackmail and punishments for disobedient women. Leftists might as well say, just let the violent rapist have his or her way and stop being such a Karen and leave these poor rapists and child abusers alone. Live and let live. This is the left's rabid misogyny that may have somehow surpassed the political right's traditional misogyny, and I didn't even think that was possible. The left hates women so much that we can't even have words or spaces for ourselves. They have also compared women for women's rights to Nazis, unironically. Where have I heard this before? It's like fighting to take down safeguarding measures to protect women and children wasn't enough for these so-called liberals and leftists. They have to swing around their progressive pride flags and virtue signal while doing it. But that's not enough. They have to coddle these male abusers. But that's not enough. They have to act like they're smarter and kinder in contrast to non-believers, which they assume to be hateful idiots. But that's not enough. They have to excommunicate heretics, especially female heretics, for simply initiating this difficult conversation. I'll note that I've lost countless acquaintances for my blasphemy, both with normies and radfems for that matter. But that wasn't enough. They have to insult and vilify and dismiss people, especially women who speak up against harmful nonsense without even addressing anything we actually said. But that's not enough. They have to act like underdog revolutionaries when universities, media, huge corporations, billionaires, government agencies, etc. are on their side. But that's not enough. They have to go out of their way. They have to go after livelihoods, and apparently that's leftist solidarity with working class and impoverished people. But that's not enough. They have to post passive-aggressive, condescending, gaslighting, friendly reminders that you don't have to know all the nuances of gender identity, a supernatural belief, to know that they know better than you. But that's not enough. They wouldn't dare consider that they and their precious political side may be wrong on anything. I went along with this gender nonsense for a bit, and I admit I was wrong, and I wouldn't be surprised if all my details are completely correct. But that's not enough. They have to silence any person, especially women, who question their dogma. But that's not enough. They have to police the anger, sadness, and disgust I and other people, especially women, feel about who dare to speak up about these issues. But that's not enough. They have to deny the existence of cancel culture, deplatforming, banning books, shutting down meetings, shutting down social media accounts, firing people, forcing them into destitutions, mobs harassing everyday people, especially disobedient, in a burn the witch, after her, burn her type of way. Whenever I see people like ACLU virtue signal with their pronouns and progressive pride flags and anything related to this tyrannical homophobic religion, I think of the harm done to women and children.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. That's obviously it was about something terrible because we are here to protest the ACLU, and all of what she said. I'd like to remind everyone that there has not been a case that the ACLU has taken that represents women against the men who pretend to be women. They do not support women at all. They only take cases against women, basically. They do not take any case. Like, for instance, Riley Gaines, they're not representing her. She was bumped out of, 5th place by Will Thomas. She had to change in front of him. There's all kinds of civil rights violations going on there. And the ACLU is not representing Riley Gaines. They're not representing any woman. They're not representing
Don't forget to like,
any
guys.
of the women in prison that are being raped by these policies, by the men. They're being raped because the ACLU installed these policies. They are not representing the women that are having their civil liberties violated. They will not represent women when they're up against a man that's pretending to be a woman, that's identifying as a woman. So I just want to remind everyone, the ACLU has not taken one, is accusing a man that identifies as a woman of something. They will not take her case. They will take his case. They will advance an agenda for the gender industry and take his case. They won't take a case of a woman getting raped in prison. They won't take a case of a woman getting raped in a rape shelter. They won't take a case of a girl getting raped in school, in the bathroom, in the locker room. They will not represent women in this, when it's up against anything gender related. So that is why we're here. We are here to say the ACLU needs to go. We need to dismantle the ACLU. If you are a card-carrying member of the ACLU, you need to know they don't represent Americans. They don't represent liberties. They're not civil, and they certainly are not a union. They try to ruin any kind of relationships people have together. They're trying to ruin men and women's relationship with each other. The gender industry is trying to separate us. And what we're here to do today is bring people together. So this is one of the greatest speakers corners I've ever led, because we can hear everyone, and it's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful day in the park, and we have more women coming up to talk. And if you would like to speak, just come and check in with me. I'll give you 3 minutes at the mic. Who's up next? Okay, come on up, lady. Woman, adult, human, female is up next.
So this is to the American Captured Lawyers Union. Jason Michael Hamm was on death row in San Quentin's men's unit awaiting his execution for beating his own 2 infants, 1 son and 1 daughter, and violently abusing the mother of his slain infants to keep her from going to police. He stored the infants' decomposing bodies in Tupperware containers. The day of his arrest, he and his battered and traumatized wife were arrested. They also had a 1-year-old girl in their custody who had life-threatening injuries, including 12 broken ribs, retinal hemorrhaging, bleeding under the skin, and internal damage. This is from Redux magazine. He is now in California Women's Prison, and his executions, like all executions in California, have been suspended by Governor Newsom. His so-called transition began post-conviction in 2019. Behind bars for 17 years, a man and a sadistic psychopath all his life. His augmentations are not yet known to include removal of his penis, but tax-funded breast implants, dyed blonde hair, and an Adam's apple reduction are. One cannot draw any other conclusion than the American Captured Lawyers Union, law firm for the gender industry, and elected officials, including Joe Biden and California's state government, are in full support of placing policies in effect that have allowed in 47 out of 50 states males convicted for appallingly violent crimes, including murders, rapists, and pedophiles, to declare themselves trans after conviction and be transferred in violation of the Geneva Convention of the First,
Article
8th,
14.
and 14th Amendment rights of these women. But even worse is the fact that these males are not required to move any male sex organ, and they are able to disguise their secondary sex characteristics, breast implants, and nearly bald when arrested in 2002, Jason Michael Hamm now has long blonde pigtails. The state will reduce the appearance of his Adam's apple. What could be the purpose of what in the animal and plant species are called predatory mimetics? Adaptation Yes, and Amy has videos about this on Known Heretic of many predatory animals and plant species that allow them to trick their prey by mimicking their or their characteristics. The prey lowers their guard, fooled that they are dealing with one of their own
Cuttlefish.
when they are dealing with someone who wants to maul them. That is what this despicable policy is about. That is what so-called trans women are. Mimetics.
Woo!
And they are men. They
Call
are
them what they
violent
are.
men. Female prisoners in 47 out of 50 are being placed in cages with violent males, most of whom are intact male sex offenders. This is not progressive nor enlightened. It is cruel and unusual punishment. It is, as Amy Achikawa, as Women to Women, says, is a live experiment on these female inmates. When the Geneva Conventions were enacted following World War II, The Hague created a lot of international human rights laws, and we all agreed to them all over the world because we never wanted to have barbarity like that conflict showed. And one of these laws was Article 25, Section 4 in 1949 at The Hague. Placing men and women in prison together is wrong and cannot be done because inevitably women get raped and murdered by the men. Both of my grandfathers fought in World War II with the U.S. Army. If they could see these 21st century atrocities in the country they fought for, they would be absolutely enraged and appalled. As would both of my grandmothers, who would be equally upset. Their generation fought for these rights that are now being eroded in plain sight. Make no mistake, woke is a war on women. All females. It is smurfery, as Mary Bork, comedian in the UK, says, sexist misogyny undermining real feminism. It is not kind or inclusive to lock women in cages with depraved males like Jason Michael Ham and convicted sex offenders. I am proud to be with this amazing group of adult human females in the nation's capital protesting this despicable policy that is getting female inmates traumatized, raped, pregnant. This is beyond the fucking pale. It is evil. And women out in the free air will fight as long as it takes to stop this. Shame on the American Captured Lawyers Union and woke smurfs like Joe Biden. Going into 2020, I not only voted for him, I did a pandemic-modified full-time virtual campaign schedule for him and dozens of Democrats. I was a lifelong Democrat, but there is nothing democratic about this men in women's prisons and female spaces and sports bullshit. I will stop at nothing to defeat leftist, totalitarian identitarians placing male sex offenders in women's prisons. Thank you.
Well done.
Okay, another adult human female.
Yeah, well, I'll explain my sign. The letters are kind of falling apart, but you can read. It says protect. It said protect women and children, not gender identity. Yeah, so now that you get the idea what it means, it also says adult human female. And the problem, the root issue with this is this idea that gender identity is something real and something that needs to be protected in law. But it's not real. If a person wants to believe in it, that's fine, but protecting gender identity in law is what allows men to identify as women and be put into prisons with women. It allows men to identify as women and be put in women's domestic violence shelters. It allows men to identify as women and be put into women's bathrooms, into locker rooms. I know many of us have probably seen these dudes hanging out, and it's because it's a protected characteristic. So you need to speak up against it. You need to fight it in law. You have to call, in Virginia we have a big election coming up, and then of course next year's more elections everywhere. You have to call your representatives, you have to call candidates and say, are you going to protect women and children? Are you going to protect gender identity? Because you cannot protect the two at the same time. You can only protect women and children, or you can protect gender identity. And right now, the ACLU is choosing to protect gender identity over women and children. And again, I know that it's not all Democrats, as most of you, but unfortunately, the Democrats working behind us and in your Capitol buildings are choosing gender identity over women and children. So you have to speak up. You have to start talking. And that's why I'm here today. Find a way to speak out against this.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay, we have one more. Oh, in the gold foil. Woman, adult, human, female.
That's right. Hi, everybody. I'm here today because the ACLU is no longer fit for purpose. I discovered this after supporting them all through the Trump presidency because I thought they were defending civil liberties, but now they're defending nonsense. I actually was in DC last for when Kelly J. Keene came around for her USA tour, and I want to describe what has happened to me since then. I was really mad and I'm still mad now, but I realized something, and I want to share it with you out there on the internet. Twitter is a great place to meet people, keep your well full, but this ends as soon as everyone who believes this just says it. It's really that simple. And so I learned one thing. I had a job before that I had to leave in part because they were completely captured and they were directly involved in medical care, and I realized I couldn't work there anymore, just morally. And it took me a while to recover from that, because when it is like a huge gaslighting. If you wake up to the fact that you just can't say the truth anymore, and as a lifelong Democrat, another one, I mean, it's time we have to tell these people the call is coming from inside the house.
Yes!
I mean, this is not a right-wing issue. If somebody calls you right-wing, that's just because they don't want to hear what you're saying. So,
Yes.
I have a job now, and I won't tell you where, but I have a rule, and my rule is I won't lie. I don't have to bring it up. I don't have to put it in anyone's face. But if I am asked to be in a room that is supposed to be women only, and there are men in there, I will leave. If somebody asks me tells me their pronouns, I'll just say pronouns are immutable. That's my belief. You just don't lie. You don't have to be mean. You don't have to be militant. You just have to never lie. And if you take that commitment to radical honesty, not only am I free now of all the anger and confusion and fear that lived in me, you just have to take the risk. You have to take the risk, because in the end, all this takes, the majority of people agree with us, they're just too scared to speak. As long as we send those signals that if we just all say no at the same time, it ends. The moment this is on the front page of the New York Times, it's over. We're getting there. We're getting there. If the Atlantic is starting to print stuff that they wouldn't have printed 2 years ago, we are getting there. We are getting there. All you need to do is just make a commitment to yourself. Don't tell a lie. If you know that a man is a man and a woman is a woman, just don't lie. It's really that simple.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that, and you are totally correct about that. No lying, and it's so easy. Just say what you see. Just say what you see and call it like it is. We have one more speaker that, we have these speakers corners so that people can come up that, want a chance at the mic to speak their mind about what the ACLU is doing. The ACLU is the legal agent of the gender industry, and they are the ones that have found niche cases to push forward an agenda. So when you see a man like Will Thomas, or you see, Dana Rivers in Washington State going to jail, that he is in women's prisons because of the ACLU. Will Thomas was able to swing because of the policies put forward by the American Civil Liberties Union. So if you are a card-carrying member, this is something you might want to know, because if you support women and girls and free speech, the ACLU is your enemy. And before I bring the last speaker, who is a gentleman that just came up and wanted to speak, I wanted to say a few things about what we're doing here. We're trying to galvanize a movement and be a guiding light for people to come to us that want to do something about the ACLU, lawyers that want to help combat the ACLU's policies. We cannot stop the bleeding unless we stop the ACLU. We can point at Will Thomas or Austin Phillips or all the men in women's sports as much as we want, but until we get to this second layer of how they are installing this in our schools, in our church, or in our prisons, in our daily life, at work with the pronouns, we can identify that now, but the next layer is the ACLU. They are the reason that the gender industry has advanced their agenda in America. So, and I just wanted to say, they're just a bunch of lawyers. We can get other lawyers, right? We can get new lawyers. They're not some huge, monolith that we can't take apart. We can, and we will. We are beginning the phases of dismantling the ACLU. They no longer represent what Americans care about. So I'm gonna go ahead and let this gentleman take the mic, and I think you will be the last speaker, so there you go.
Yep, by mail. I'm also a lawyer, which normally has no bearing on anything, except I got to see some of the social dynamics in law school and beyond. People think the ACLU is this big, fancy law firm full of really smart people. And they do have smart people. But the thing is, lawyers are human. Lawyers are full of narrow-mindedness. Lawyers are full of tunnel vision. Lawyers are full of desperately seeking approval from powerful people. Mm-hmm. And right now, a lot of those powerful people are the trans activists, the activists online. If you look at online market research, the trans activists look a lot more popular than they actually are. Uh-huh. So that online market research skews a whole bunch of business calculations, political calculations. If they think, oh, this is the next big thing, trans is the new gay, then all the people who want to look progressive are going to try to side with the activists. Except the activists aren't representing the new great movement. They're representing a few not very nice people. And they're not recognizing it because they aren't looking outside of their media bubble. And the same applies to lawyers. There's very little awareness of the practicalities of life. In law school, when I told about a guy whose wife's ex-boyfriend got out of prison and needed a place to stay, that's an everyday life for a lot of people. Prison is part of life. Changing rooms are part of life. Not being able to complain is part of life. But you have people entering the higher ranks of the legal profession, high prestige organizations like the ACLU, who don't understand what ordinary life is like. So they don't understand how things go wrong. And let me tell you, the legal system, all these precautions were designed around how things go wrong. And if the people in charge of maintaining them, of steering that, don't understand things going wrong, weak people are going to be hurt. And I hate to say it, but women tend to be physically weaker than men. People evolved around that. When somebody said that 98% of violent crime is committed by men, I got so angry I wanted to punch someone. That's a joke, but that's also a reality for some people. The thing is, you've got people who just live in, I suppose you could call them ivory tower bubbles, but they're just so on top of the world that they can't imagine life going wrong. Information trickles from below. And there's more and more people who are being aware of that. But you've got to communicate to people, not just as a matter of an easily labeled activist, but as, okay, how is life for the poor people? And that is supposed to be what they're about. That's not what they're really about. They're really about feeling good about themselves. But we can create new institutions. We can create new bodies of work if people have a clear idea about what they are protecting, what people need. And you've got the big ACLU plus a couple other legal organization bubbles. Socially, they're completely self-referential, but the rest of life isn't. And that is where new organizations can be created. Don't forget, the ACLU are just people. Lawyers are just people, and they can be stupid, they can be critiqued. You don't need to be a lawyer to say the ACLU is crazy.
Thank you so much. And look at that. Look what our beacon of hope brought. We brought a lawyer. And we're going to be bringing more lawyers. We need a clan of lawyers to go after the ACLU. A group that is dedicated to dismantling the ACLU because it does not serve the American people. It actually goes against what most of us believe. So if you want to get involved in the ACLU and dismantling it, I am Rev Fem Street Beat on Twitter. And you can reach me at freespeechforwomen@gmail.com. Thank you so much for everyone that attended and all the lovely, wonderful speeches. Thank you.
Guys, and we're closing up. And for everybody who's on the stream, just remember November 3rd, we will be protesting the American College of Obstetrician Gynecologists. And we will, and I'm thinking of pulling together a few more organizations such as the Leche League, the Breastfeeding Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine, and the American Academy of Pediatrics. So, because they're all in this together. They are responsible for the health and well-being of mothers, birthing mothers and their families, and they're not fit for purpose. So again, November 3rd, American College of Obstetrician Gynecologists. We're going to be protesting Washington, D.C. as well. So anybody who wants to get involved, contact me on Twitter. I'm ASTFXX, so Slightly Twisted Female XX, and then a Slightly Twisted Female @gmail.com. And we'll talk to you soon. Bye, guys. Signing off. All right. Busted this. Let's see.